Okay, so Jess asked, no one in Clubhouse. All right. Jess asked, what's your single greatest challenge running sprints? There's always a short answer and a long answer to all these questions. The short answer is getting started because there's a mindset, right? So like sprints, my buddy Richard Banfield, who is the VP of Design Transformation at Envision, speaking of Envision, Jess, he uses the term to describe design sprints, Trojan horse. So what he means by that, or what people like us that facilitate sprints mean by that, is there's an output from sprints, designing a prototype that you test out on people. So that's like a direct output that you get from it. The larger value is the outcome that you're going for. And that is a change in mindset about how that group of people begin to talk with one another. There's a new language that starts to form. There's a new process. There's a new approach, all this change. And most of the time, this is a company that has existing people, process, tools, methodologies, and sprints change a lot of that. Definitely, in my opinion, for the better, but any kind of change, humans and change there's a little friction there. So the single greatest challenge then is introducing the sprint to a team that has all that existing process, people, tools in place. And well, let's say a close cousin to that is the name itself is challenging because sprints already mean things. In the world of software developers and product people, there are agile development sprints. So that already means stuff. So there's a little bit of confusion over what a design sprint is. And then you have that first word of design. Design is a big word, and people, including myself for years, misunderstand what we're talking about when it comes to design. So people outside of design think, why would I be a part of something that's design? I'm an engineer, I'm in operations, I'm in customer service. Why would I join design? That's what designers do. And designers, not all designers, some designers are worried about democratizing design as a craft instead of design as a process. And design sprint is much more about the process. It's about using the principles and the methods that a designer tends to use, showing over telling, visualizing their ideas, asking about the problem instead of jumping into solutions. So all these things that designers do well, it's bringing that structure and that process to a group of people to solve together. So designers tend to be, at first, some tend to be sort of concerned about design sprints being for a cross-functional group of people to be a part of. So was that helpful, Jess? Cool. Okay. Question one, let's see. Question two, cool. I see some other ones coming in. Jess's second question was, what would be a good place to start with design sprints in a corporate setting? So good follow-up question. I think that first, you probably shouldn't call them design sprints. You should probably call them a meeting or a workshop or an experiment or a new way of, we're going to try this new way of working, because we've been experiencing these 2 or 3 challenges. And we all agree that we want to move faster. We want more better voices in the ideation phase. We want to be excited about the things that we're investing in before putting time and effort into them, right? So like there are always these challenges that every group is facing. So attaching the sprint to the challenges, but probably leaving the word design sprint out of it, because the best thing to do is just to take a piece of a sprint and just do it in isolation. So open up a sprint, like read Jake's book or any of the resources at the bottom there, and take an activity out and try to just run it with the group, like a Crazy 8 experiment, right? So like you can do Crazy 8s is, the process of Crazy 8s is that you quickly sketch 8 different ideas to a solution you're working on in 8 minutes. And what that does, so Crazy 8 is a good way to flesh out ideas and get lots of different ideas on the table in a matter of minutes, which often have this tendency to, you get to the breakthrough idea or the next iteration of the idea. So doing something like that as an experiment, and then allowing the group to say, what would this look like for us to do it, for us to bring this into this kind of workshop or this kind of conversation, right? And allowing the team to just talk about what they liked about it, what's different, what's new, and then saying, cool, next time maybe we can do it with this. And then this next step of everyone would actually build on their crazy eights and sketch out an idea, right? And so like just time boxing it to be an hour or so, because going back to your first question, I think it was related. I think the underpinning of the challenges that I mentioned was everyone is worried about wasting time. So if it's a new thing and it's going to change our process and it's design and I don't do design, all those things, when you dig into that, most of it is people are busy and they don't want to waste time. So that's why they kind of like have arms extended when you talk about a design sprint. So don't call it a sprint. Chunk it into something that you could do over the course of an hour, find an interesting activity. You could also do something completely unrelated to a sprint. You could just play a game. So if you go to, there's a million of these out there, but I didn't do it as a link. Session Lab is a great tool that I use for building visual agendas. And they have a whole library of games and different things that you could do and incorporate. The thing that what you're trying to do there is just find a broken part of the process and play a game or do a part of the sprint and ask the team to think about how it would change how work happens, how conversations happen. And as you get people leaning further and further into it, you make it from a game to something that's an hour to a half day. And all of a sudden you're sprinting. What you shouldn't do is call it a design sprint, force everybody to do a whole bunch of work and schedule 5 days on everybody's calendar, because they're just going to freak out. Especially when you tell them we're only going to be working on one thing. They're like, what? No, I have a lot of projects. Okay.
I like what you're talking about, how you're leading people into it. You're leading people into it rather than just, hey, here, we're going to try this new thing, because it's less intimidating. And I think that also creates less friction in terms of adoption, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good observation. Okay. Jess, is this also yours, this last one?
I put a lot of questions in there. So, oh, yes. Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah, no. that one's actually mine.
All right, cool. Nathan.
Yeah, and I work at a school district with innovation. And so, part of my challenge is some of the things you've been saying is, people have processes and ways of doing things and ways of making decisions. And I'm kind of coming in from the outside on the periphery, trying to find ways to encourage more sort of outside the box design thinking kind of stuff.
Do you work in a school, K through 12 or something?
Yeah, so I'm in a school district, Richland 2 school district in Columbia, South Carolina. So I work in the district office, but with faculty, students, staff, anybody can use my services basically.
Oh, wow. Super cool. I got really close to doing a project with the Department of Education in New York City to try to bring design thinking, human-centered design into the classrooms there. So I always tell people, I think like educators make for great facilitators because they've got a lot of the tools and the temperament. I'm running a program with a group of high school students this summer where a bunch of US and mostly US high school students will be doing a joint design thinking program with students in other very different parts of the world. And they're going to be doing it on like climate change and different things. So it'll be an experience for me to bring this stuff that I normally do with adults to kids. Probably have a lot to learn from you, Nathan. Okay, so I'm just going to add your name in here, Nathan. Okay, so Nathan's question is, Nicole's here. Nicole's my friend.
Yes, I am here from Clubhouse.
Super. Let's see. Okay. Nathan asked, how do you create buy-in with big shots for more design sprints? It's, like these are great build on questions, because I think for me, I mean, there's a personally, I think humility goes a long way, and certainly like knowing that this has changed. So you have to be really patient with it. And of course, demonstrating value. But like, how do you demonstrate value when no one gives you a chance to do the design sprint or to do the thing? And so like just chunking it, as we were talking about with Jess, just chunking it and showing small bite-sized chunks of value, so that what needs to happen is that the leadership or even the opposer to the sprint needs on their own time to connect it to the value based on how they measure the world or how they're being measured, right? So if someone that works in sales, or maybe, yeah, let's use sales. Someone that works in sales, they're being measured on number of deals, deal size, you know, like how they're able to bring revenue into the company, something like this. I assume most salespeople are being measured. And so if you can demonstrate to them that instead of just chasing after a whole bunch of new feature ideas that they hear constantly and from different voices and different customers, imagine if we could really quickly bring the voice of the customer into a sprint and solve one of the biggest challenges that our existing customer segment is facing, and get that out to market in sort of like record time. So you can manipulate and use time to your advantage here. But what you're talking about is allowing them to, what I'm doing is I'm talking about the challenges that that person is experiencing. So you have to step out of the shoes of the end customer for a moment and use the same empathy and human-centered design on this leader, this person that's resisting sprints, and ask them, what are their challenges? Where are they facing difficulty? What would they like to see more of? What's not working in the process? How can you become a part of the process within the time that you have day in and day out? Because someone that runs sales over a district or over a geographic region probably can't join an entire design sprint. So they're interested, but I don't have time. So how can you chunk it down, like we were talking about with Jess, to invite them into an experiment of a sprint or part of a sprint where they could just see the value and begin to connect the value in their own words with their own context. That's what it takes a lot of time, Nathan, because you need to spend time getting to know what their world is like and what their frustrations and challenges and time commitments are like, so that you can begin to demonstrate the value of something like a design sprint to them. But it's rarely using the word design sprint or design thinking. It's much more often about very specific contexts and challenges that they're facing. Create buy-in with. I just want to read your question one more time. Think if anything else comes up. How do you create buy-in with big shots for more? Yeah, and then the other thing I would think about is there's direct benefit to them, and then there's also, when I hear big shots, I think people with teams. So like, who are the people that they're in charge of, and how might sprints benefit their teams and their people? Most often it's like, we're too busy, we can't join these sessions, we have good ideas, but you're not inviting us into them. We don't know how to contribute. And then you guys go off and do a bunch of stuff that doesn't create value for me and my part of the world or my part of the business. So allowing those people to also to join, put their ideas forward, you know. But it's, the tricky part is that going from 0 to 1 with sprints, there's like a big gap in between there where you have to do a lot of experiments, a lot of demonstrating to people what sprints look and feel like, because there's a lot of confusion, ambiguity about what the time's going to look like, what's the value that's going to come out of it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very much. Appreciate those insights.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions from people in education. There's a woman too. You should look her up by all means. I'm sure she'd spend some time with you and be helpful. Her name, this happens every time I go to mention somebody's name. It's just like, I'm going to remember it and I'm going to put it in the chat somewhere. Yeah, Nathan, I'll follow up with you separately. Saba, there it is. I just had to stop talking for a second. Her name is Saba. I don't know how to spell her last name, but I'm going to do Kidwai. Saba's not the most, it's not John Smith. So I think if you Google, you'll probably find her. She works at Apple and she partners with Apple's customers and other partners, I believe, to sort of like bring design thinking into schools. Smart lady. Okay. Thanks, Nathan. Okay. All right, we got a few more from Jess. Let's see. How many people do you need to run an effective sprint? There's a PC answer to this. Let me just say, I think 3 to 10, because sprints are supposed to embody design thinking, and design thinking and human-centered design is supposed to be different perspectives other than just build what you want, what you think, right? Like you are not the user. So in order to not be the user, you have to talk to those people. You have to have other voices. You have to have other perspectives from people who have witnessed your customer experiencing those problems. And it's really helpful when those people work in functions outside of yours, because they get to, like, a customer service person deals with a very different experience of that customer than you as a designer or as a product person. And then the person that works in marketing that's thinking about how to communicate the value of your product or service has also a different perspective to it. So at least a few people is probably a good idea. I think the sweet spot has always been around 5 to 7. And then over 10, you start to have to manage a mob. And you get like a lot of redundancy. So like the counterpoint to all the stuff that we've been talking about, like the hard parts of getting started with sprints, the interesting thing is there's this cliff when sprints have really started to pick up momentum, and then the challenges are different. Now you have to actually like slow people down because they just want to run sprints on everything and they want everyone to be there. They want like their whole team to be a part of it just to make sure everyone hears the conversation, because they're bringing the same habits to the process. Like just put everybody in the meeting, but a sprint is not a meeting. A meeting is not a sprint, vice versa. So then you have to start to learn how to like slow people down a little bit, make sure they're running a sprint. You have the right people in the room. But that's a good problem to have, because now they're sort of bought in and now everyone wants to do sprints and that design thinking thing that you did. Hey, Rick. Good to see you.
Hey, sorry, I for whatever reason couldn't get on with the link. So
sorry about that. Good to see you here. Let's see. I'm going to keep rocking through these questions. Thanks, Jess. These are great. What's the difference between agile and design sprints? Well, since you asked, I just so happen to have agile. I'm getting a link for you. Super popular question. I found, like, especially when sprints first, when like the book came out, and also like when lots of people were just learning about sprints, this was like one of the most popular questions. So I wrote an article about it. It's a little old and it talks about us being a product development firm, but a lot of the lessons are still in there. The short answer to answer it today is design sprints happen first, agile sprints happen next. Because agile sprints are all about like implementation and taking the ideas and the insights that come out of a design sprint and bringing them to market. The design sprint is all about understanding the potential solutions that we could then implement and execute and bring to market in our agile sprints. So there's a framework that some consultants came up with called SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, something. That might be it. And they refer to design sprints sort of as sprint zero. Right. So they happen like up front so that the team can get together, figure out what is this going to look and feel like. Let's make sure that it aligns with what our customers are expecting. And then once we're clear, then we can move it into our sort of like sprint planning. Does that make sense? I don't really love SAFe, but that's a different question. I think I answered it in another space somewhere else, but that's the short answer. And then I unpack it a little bit more in this article. Sometimes I rewatch these episodes and I'm like, man, once in a while I should just answer a question in like several words versus several minutes. I'm practicing. Here's another one. Let me answer Mark's. What is the rough split of time spent prepping and planning versus running the design sprint itself? Yeah, this is a great question, Mark. When the first time, so I'm not going to do a good job of being concise. I already see it. I'm going into story mode. The first times that I ran sprints, say like the first 10 sprints I ran, it was literally like book open, notes. Okay. And then in this step, I do this and it should be 20 minutes. So I was just like there to run the recipe. And then as I started to understand more the role of a, like a really professional facilitator and all the other components that go along with that, I started to have more of an appreciation of the prep. And then when I'd watch other people facilitate sprints or just any kind of conversation, I was like, wow, they're pros. And that seems really difficult. I don't know how they managed to pull that off. And there's no magic. It's just all the prep that they put into it. And so more and more of time spent up front doing one-on-ones with senior leaders, with stakeholders that are influencing or are otherwise going to impact the sprint, spending time with them to understand what's important, the expectations they have from the group, constraints that they like me and the group to think about when we're going through the sprint, getting people into the process, the tools, the conversation, so that they can say, I should be here or I shouldn't be here, but you should have this person that should be there. Getting familiar with tools like Miro. So all the pre-work that goes into it, and then research, like what is it that we're here to solve? What's the problem all about? What do we know about the space today? What have you already done? So a lot of times groups ask me to run a sprint, and I find out during my own research that they already have a working product. And so I tell them, well, that's our prototype, actually. We're going to start by doing some collective interviews together and asking people about what the existing product is doing well and not doing well. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to do any part of the sprint except doing some shared interviews together to watch how people react. And then we can take some steps backward to understand the problems that we're actually trying to solve for. So all that, allows me to run really effective sprints. It also has a side benefit of allowing me to run shorter sprints because I put much more time into prep and also into asynchronous sort of like problem discovery, reframing, all of those things. And because of that, the group tends to be like sort of 10 miles down the road by the time we get into an official design sprint. So I didn't answer your question, actually. So the rough split, I would say, man, it's probably 50-50. I'm like, and that's why when I'm hired to do a sprint, I'm careful not to tell people that I'm just going to show up and we're going to spend 3 or 4 days together. There's like a lot of stuff that I'm going to do beforehand, because what we might decide is that you shouldn't run a sprint.
That's really helpful, Jay. Thanks.
Jay, when you talked about, you just said we might decide it's best for us not to do a sprint. Can you go into that a little bit deeper? Like in what scenarios does it make more sense not to run a sprint?
Yeah. Another super popular question. When should we run a sprint? When should we not run a sprint? I'm also Let's see if I can do this on the fly. Give me one sec. Richard Banfield. I'm going to answer this and then I'm going to share. Otherwise, you're not going to pay attention to me. More or less, the answer is I in 99% of the times that I'm asked to facilitate a sprint, I run some form of problem framing beforehand. And problem framing for me makes sure that the challenge is clear to everyone in the room, clear, but also important and actionable. And then I have the right people lined up. So do I have that cross-functional slice of people that have perspective and experience in the space that we're going to create solutions for in our sprint? Because a design sprint is, you're familiar with the double diamond in the design world? So you have like 2 diamonds. The first one on the left is all about problem definition and understanding and alignment. And the second one is all about sort of like prototyping and iteration until you're at the point that you can really like take those ideas and bring them to market. And so sprints actually sit in the second diamond, at the very early stage of the second diamond, but there's this whole other set of conversations that you need to have to make sure that you should do anything like prototyping and ideation and whatever follows design sprints. So I always do an activity called problem framing, which is a whole nother can of worms that we can get into. I also do a very similar session to this called a problem framing AMA. I think the next one happens in 2 weeks from today. So we can get into problem framing as a practice there. But that helps.
Throw something in, Jay. It's worth sitting in. I spend all my time in the first diamond with problem framing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sit in today to learn more about the design sprint onwards. So
cool. Yeah. It's really hard. Framing is super hard and abstract and it's uncomfortable and no one likes to do it. But the end goal for me is that I want to make sure before anyone agrees to spend even a day in a sprint, that we should be running a sprint on this problem, that it's, like I said, that everyone understands it, which is a huge assumption. Like just because I understand the problem doesn't mean the next person does, or they probably think that it's for a different market altogether. So like having that conversation to make sure we're aligned is super important. The counter argument to that is, can't you just figure it out in the sprint? It's only a few days, but you'd be surprised. All of our first questions were, how do we get buy-in to allow a group of people to spend a few days on something? So a few days is a lot, especially when you talk about 7, 10 people, especially when you start talking about like travel and all the other things in a different world, maybe in a world that's coming back again soon. And the thing I want to share with you is, I'm really peppering my buddy over here. My friend Rich, again, wrote a good article, and there's this like interesting flow chart that he created to simplify all of the nonsense that I just shared, to make it very to the point, like run a sprint if this and this and that and that. Don't run it if this. The engineer in me loves that.
I love it too. It's very visual. It's like a map.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you for sharing.
He's great. Okay, let's see. Jess, you also asked, can sprints be adapted for non-design goals? For example, a CX sprint? Yeah, definitely. So all of our first sprints, because it made sense, we were a product firm, they were all like sprints to solve for a new or different digital experience. But since then, as you step out of sprints and you start to learn, like you start to notice the principles that you're leading and that the group is exhibiting in your sprints, visual thinking, like showing over telling, a balance of power, allowing quiet voices to rise up, allowing time for quiet, divergent, asynchronous thinking to happen. So like all these things that are exhibited in a well-run design sprint, you start to be able to bring those into other things. So because of that, you can bring those principles into like anything like this. The sprint, like I mentioned earlier when Nathan asked his question, that sprint is meant to, I think it's going to be like having high school kids try to improve climate change in Bali or Fiji or right? So like nothing at all to do with the world that I came from as a software engineer. But it doesn't matter, because what you're doing is you're bringing all of those principles and practices into the conversation. You probably have to change things. You may not be designing visually. You may not, and the people probably need to change. So you may not have software engineers and architects and content strategists. So you have to figure out which voices you need in there and the activities to do. So there's some shift, but the principles are still the same. The big stages are still the same. You're going to get together to understand the problem. You're going to allow people time to come up with ideas and solutions to that. You're going to turn that into some kind of experience that you can put in front of the person experiencing that problem so that you can learn from them.
Strangely enough, it's easier for me to conceptualize a design sprint for the use case that you just provided, as opposed to like my own organization, which I think that means I need to spend time in problem framing. Does it not?
Yeah, it might. Yeah, because you might just be running a sprint just to run it without really understanding what's the objective, what's the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they need to get specific.
Yeah. Awesome questions. Cool. Let me take, it's a quarter of, let me just do a super short tour of this toolkit. I'm going to share my screen. So what happened was I was doing a lot of these sorts of things, like one-off conversations, training events and whatnot, and I would answer these really interesting questions. And one, I felt like certain questions came up over and over and over again, and there was no documented place for me to capture that and share out with people that couldn't be in the workshop. And then the other thing that happened was people would raise their hand along the way or at the end and say, can I have the slides? Can I have the templates? Can I have all these things? And I never had a good answer to that. And so I decided to create these toolkits. So the toolkits, you can think of them as the intersection of training plus materials. So it's when I run a sprint, I have decks that I use. I have digital templates in Miro and Mural that I use to visualize the ideas in the conversation. I have agendas that I create and share out. I have pre-work activities to like prime the group. So all that stuff lives inside of the toolkit. And I make it available for a small price. The Design Sprint Toolkit, I think, is $495 US. And then to help you get through it and to sort of like take you from wherever you're at to coach you through the process and to coach you through using the tools and the resources in the toolkit are these videos that I've recorded to take you through it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff inside. This is just this is a website where the toolkit lives and you can get access to it. There's a couple things in here that you could preview just to see what it's like and what it'll feel like. So a lot of these are videos to step you through, say, step 1 in the process, step 2, right? And then up here are all of the resources that come included inside of it. So there's customizable agendas based on time zones and however you want to customize it to make work for you. But there are 2 versions of it, for remote and for in-person. All the digital templates that I use in whichever tool. Right now I have the toolkits support Mural and Miro. You can see this. So there's a couple sets of templates that come across each. I'm working is a strong word. I'm talking with Envision to try to get support within their freehand tool. And then there's a bunch of decks and guides and resources for you, the facilitator, as well as for the team. What I've also done, if you're curious to see like what is a toolkit and what would I be getting, if you go to this link that I'll put in the chat in a moment, you can see there's 3 toolkits I've created. So this is the one that we're talking about, Design Sprint Toolkit. There's one for problem framing. You can get the 2 of them together for like 20% off. They work well together, but they're also meant to work on their own. And then I also created this separate free toolkit, which is basically the first 3 steps of this toolkit. I took it out and it's a separate set of activities you can do for the group that's trying to decide what's the most next important opportunity for us to work on. So this one is free and it'll give you a good sense of like what the toolkits look and feel like. It's lighter and there's not as, I didn't put as much into it, but it gives you a good introduction to our toolkits. Any questions about that stuff, about the toolkit specifically?
I'm thinking in terms of resources, Jay, because you include a couple of resources in the Miro board, right, in the bottom, and then you just shared your toolkits. What would be a good place to start based on your experience and perspective? Like, where would you,
For
if you didn't
you,
know anything? Yeah, if you didn't know anything, you're super interested. One day, maybe like I honestly, I'm super interested in possibly becoming a facilitator eventually. Like, where would you advise me to start?
Yeah, well, let's see. So this, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but if you can find me, bring everyone to me. This series down here, it's called Facilitators Q&A. So for you, the individual, I think the most important thing in running a good sprint is being a good facilitator. That's the foundation of it. That's what will make or break your sprint. Because with it, you'll prep, you'll talk to all the right people, you'll have all the right information. It's not going to happen overnight, but the better the facilitator you become, the better your sprints will be. And it'll also give you some ideas about how to like bring the right people in, get people on board, get them over the cliff of worrying about sprints and the change it'll bring. So I created this video series. I took a pause over the last few weeks, but I hope to get back to it in the next couple weeks. But it basically, it's conversations with other people, design product leaders that have faced challenges in either, like Doug, in this episode, Doug was talking about scaling design thinking programs. So once you get it off the ground, how do you build it up and scale it so that other people will accept it and bring it into the company? Other people have come and talk about specific challenges they face as a facilitator. It's not so design sprint focused. It's much more general to facilitation. So this is a good free series of content that you can get through. Each video is like less than 10. It's like 10 to 15 minutes tops. So that's one. This link here. So this is a specific place that'll take you to, my friend Kai Haley runs the Design Sprint Academy or the Design Sprint practice within Google. And this link goes to a specific resource that I created with a group of other people. But if you zoom back out to Design Sprint Kit with google.com, the link there, you'll also find a bunch of resources and videos and templates that you could start to use as well. And then if it's helpful, Duco is a free app that we created years ago. Unfortunately, we're not maintaining it. So it's a little outdated in terms of like what I think a sprint is and feels like, but it's a decent place to get started. It's sort of like if you read the book, do you know what I mean when I'm talking about the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I haven't read it yet, but it's the one by the Google Ventures, JV.
Yeah. So that, I mean, they did an amazing job of like really simplifying it, bringing case studies of things that'll just hit home no matter what kind of work you do. So reading the book is a great start for sure. If you have a super short attention span like I do, Duco is sort of like just like a visual aid, a visual supplement to the book, and breaks down like what you need to know, the materials you might need to have. You could see it was created 5 or 6 years ago. So there's nothing about remote. It's all like assuming that everyone's in the room together. So yeah, these are some good ones. And then if like, yeah, I mean, the toolkit itself, I do charge for it. It's meant to bring all of this stuff under one roof together.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm gonna check these out. And you said your problem framing one is in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's see. Visit this link. Oh, nope, it's not updated. Okay, let me just tell you. The next one is June 16th. Yeah, 2 weeks from today at 12 Eastern, same time.
You will see me there.
Awesome. Cool. Let's see. So checking in on time. Okay, we're almost there. Are there any other? Okay, there is one more question. Cool. Oh no, that's problem framing. Yeah, there's no more questions on the board. Did anyone have anything, any last minute things they wanted to ask? Nathan,
Are you going to share the recording, Jay? Just because I missed the first.
yeah, I am.
Okay.
So later today, I'll go back through. What I'll do is I'll attach snippets to where I answered each of these questions.
Cool.
So you have a direct link to each of those, and then off to the right, I'll add a recording of the entire session.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. All right, gang. I'm gonna go have some lunch or breakfast.
This was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
man.
thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for being
thanks
here.
very much, Jay.
Thanks a lot, Jay.
appreciate you.
Cheers.
Take care.